I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to share with everybody tonight because there is so much that can be shared, probably hours and hours and hours, and I would just touch on the most basic information. And I've been doing this for over 20 years, so it's like, really, her again? Really? So I decided I needed to kind of shake this up and share some information with you in case you happen to be one of our volunteers or somebody who works in the schools and has seen me at the LIU or any number of places around York. And I thought, what can I talk about that you haven't maybe heard in a certain way, but you all know down deep and you've all experienced? So what I came up with was information called What Grieving Children Have Taught Us Since the Towers Fell. Alrighty? Now think about this. Every one of us on September 11th, 2001, had our lives changed forever, did we not? How many of you honestly remember where you were when the first tower fell? Is there anyone, put your hands up, who didn't see it fall right as it was happening? Anyone who did not see it fall as it was happening? You got to see it later. Anybody who was watching it as it happened live? Hands up. Would you agree with me, you guys, that you have been changed forever by the fact that 1 minute you were watching those people in the windows, waving, like on their cell phones, wanting help, the firemen there to rescue them. Did we not think that day, well, they're going to come out. It'll probably take a while. That's a big fire in a big building, but they're coming down, right? But when that first little burst of dust came out that window and that tower started to crumble before our very eyes that day, every one of us witnessed death, up close and personal. Now, I'm a hospice volunteer for many years. It's where the roots of my profession are. I've sat bedside. I've watched people take their last breath. I've been with my grandmother. I've seen people take their last breath. I've seen my relatives. And that day, I witnessed thousands of people dying. And so did children. And every one of us who went through that together experienced trauma and unresolved loss. Because when the towers fell and the dust settled, there was nothing left, right? Were you like me thinking, there's thousands of people in those towers, they'll find them. They'll just kind of move stuff out of the way, and then they're going to find them. And when they didn't find them, we all had to face the fact that, wow, what does that mean? We have a wonderful staff member at Olivia's house who shared with me what it was like the day he found out his brother had fallen through a big open hole on the flight deck of his aircraft carrier, down through the ship and into the water. Never found his body. Those things change us forever. And imagine our sense of safety. It's gone. And what if you're 4? What if you're 4 years old? So they've taught me some lessons, and I thought I would share those lessons with you today. The first lesson that they've taught me is never underestimate what a child knows. So many adults make this mistake. Now, they don't make this mistake because they're this mean, horrible adult, and they don't make this mistake because they know better, but they just don't want to deal with their child in the moment. They underestimate the child because they really don't think that a child can understand death, because when they were a child, no one explained it to them. Children are really astute observers. I have a 3-year-old grandson. I have had the privilege of watching that little guy watch me do things and watch his mommy do things. And if you've ever watched a child learn how to do something, It's amazing. You can actually see the little wheels turning in their heads, right? They're like watching everything. Unfortunately, some adults underestimate children at a time when they need to learn the most. And that is when someone they love has died. As Emilio said earlier, it's a teachable moment. It's the most wonderful teachable moment, death is. Unfortunately, sometimes children are excluded from illness. How many of you know someone who didn't know their loved one was really sick? Anybody? All right, in our last program, we had a 14-year-old girl whose father did not want her to know he was dying. He had a heart condition, and of course he was slowing down, and he was winded, but he never, ever told her he was dying, and he forbid his family to do so. Imagine her anger when he had a heart attack and died. And she found out the rest of the family was really prepared and knew it was coming. But she didn't. Luckily, we have Dina Albright, who you're going to get to meet on the panel, who helps when a child is facing a very serious illness, specifically cancer, and needs to have support. Dina and I have worked together for almost 20 years. We wrote the programs at Olivia's house together, and I count on her. And we are so fortunate in this community that we have her to reach out to. Dina works at Olivia's house. She has been a part of our programs from the beginning and works with our teen group. So if we have any questions about teens tonight, I'm sure we're going to throw them your way, Dina. But keeping a child from knowing the truth about the illness as a way of protecting yourself, the adult, is not helpful. There have been parents who have excluded the child from going to the funeral for the same reason. You don't want to go to that old funeral now, do you? That horrible funeral home, you don't want to go in there, do you? What child in their right mind would say, yeah, take me? We're lucky we've got Mr. Al Cooner here tonight, who's going to serve on our panel, and is going to talk about his years of experience in welcoming children into his funeral home. We had a mom early on in our program years, Dina and I. Before Olivia's house was built, we ran the program for 8 years in the southern end of the county. We'd meet in churches, rent space. And I remember one year there was a woman who lost her mom when she was 5. Well, it was in, I guess, 1965, and she was just not even asked if she wanted to go to the funeral. They just didn't take her. Fast forward, she has a 4-year-old and a 5-year-old, and her husband died. Do you think she took her kids? She didn't, because that was the way it was for her. When they came to our program, because they were having all kinds of issues and behavior problems and nightmares, we talked about the fact that they didn't get to go to the funeral, and they didn't understand where Daddy was. We have a field trip that we take the children in week 4 of our 8-week program, and we jaunt right across the street to Mr. Cooner's funeral home, and those kids take over, and Al lets them have whatever time they need and ask as many questions as they need to ask, and he'll talk a little bit about that on the panel. It is one of the most well-received nights of the 8 weeks in our program because they're in control. There's no adult welcomed into the funeral home that night so that they can say, shh, quiet, you don't want to ask that question. You don't want to go up and touch that casket. Don't do that. No. They're there with Mr. Cooner, who says, come on up here. Come on up here and help me roll the casket bed up and down so you can see that that's what happens, so that the body can be up and everybody can view it. And so that the body can go down in and we can shut the lid and it won't smash Mommy's face. Let me show you how that works. And it's beautiful, and it's the most incredible teachable moment. And I'm proud to say that we're one of the few grief centers in the country that does that. And he is our partner in that. Depending on the parent, the kids have taught me that sometimes they aren't allowed to mourn. That's grief gone public, according to Alan Wolfelt, my mentor. Mourning is when you let your feelings out and you let people know, I'm sad, I'm angry, I'm relieved, I feel a little joy. Sometimes children aren't permitted to talk about how their loved one died, especially if it was a suicide. And it's interesting because we find at Olivia's house that if the parents don't give those children permission to mourn and to really kind of put their feelings out there about how their loved one died, they'll come to Olivia's house and they'll share it with us. We had a situation where a daddy had completed suicide, and the little girl, she was 4, she was sent to her room because the coroner was taking the body to the ambulance, zipped it up in the body bag, and the mother, out of a sense of protection, erroneously sent the little girl up to her room. When she came to Olivia's house a few weeks later, she said, "My little girl didn't see anything. I kept it from her. She doesn't know. It was the best thing for her." 2 weeks later in the program, the little girl took the dollhouse and acted out the entire experience. She was peeking out her window, and she watched it all, unbeknownst to her mother, who thought she had secured that from her, kept her from that horrible, terrible memory. But that little girl needed to tell her story, as Emilio said. She just needed to share it. She saw what she saw. Unfortunately, that mom was wonderfully open to the education she received from Olivia's house and started to share about how Daddy died in a truthful way. We have to support parents in being honest. We use a suitcase analogy at Olivia's house because I oftentimes get parents telling me they're so young and I don't know what to tell them and I don't know how much to tell them and I don't know how to tell them. And it's our job at Olivia's house to support them and teach them that you don't have to know everything. Just provide an opportunity for the questions. You can say to them, "That's a great question. I don't know. I'll help you find out. I know some people at Olivia's house, and we'll call and see if maybe they know." Or, "You know what? That is a question I've always had myself since I was little. And I don't think we'll ever find the answer to that. But that's okay, because there are questions in life we may never know the answer to." Right? Let's wrap our head around the fact that there's some things we may never really understand. The suitcase analogy comes from a true story, a little girl who was fleeing Nazi Germany with her father one night. And they put all of their belongings in 2 suitcases, a big one for her daddy and a little one for her. And they got on the train in the middle of the night, and she said, "Daddy, I don't understand this word Holocaust. I don't understand why we're leaving. What is happening?" And he said, "Bring me your suitcase, and I'll tell you everything." She brought him her little suitcase. He said, "Now, bring me my big suitcase." And she struggled to lift his big suitcase full of all of his belongings. She couldn't budge it. She tried and tried, she couldn't budge it. And he said, "When you are big enough to move that heavy suitcase, I will tell you all about the Holocaust. For now, know that you can ask me any question, and I will always be honest. I will tell you what I can tell you based on how big your muscles are. I will always tell you if I know the answer, and if I don't, I will tell you that. You will always get the honest truth from me. If you're not old enough, I will tell you you can ask again, and as soon as I feel you're old enough, then I will answer it. But know that there is never a time that I won't be honest." I love that analogy, and that empowers families, and that gives a parent courage. I don't have to tell them everything right now. I can tell them some things, facts, because we know that when you leave blanks for children, they fill them in, and they don't always fill them in with facts. They make up far worse scenarios in their little heads, and even in their teenage heads. So we want to give them the information we can give them as best as we can. Okay, another lesson that the children have taught me. Adults are the best and the worst support for grieving children. And I love to share this story with you. I share it every time I teach about parents who think they are helping, but who make a bigger mess of things out of that loving idea that we just don't talk about it. This is from an 11-year-old girl. Now, you all, everyone in this room knows this child. And I'll tell you who she is when I'm done. She says, "My mother died when I was 11. I don't really have a clear memory of her since my father did this let's pretend it didn't happen repressed denial thing. In his own misguided coping process, he removed everything of hers from our home. In some kind of tragically wrong version of grieving that my father partook in, there was nothing left. I have only 2 pictures of her and none of her things. My mother was just obliterated. My dad even sold my mother's blue station wagon. Without any warning, I came home from school one day, soon after she had died, and it was gone. That car had provided me a safe place to grieve. It still smelled like my mom, so I would climb into the back seat and I would think about her. I didn't get to go to her funeral. We were never allowed to talk about her. Because of this denial, I fantasized that she was alive. I figured that she was kidnapped, like Patty Hearst. If it could happen to Patty Hearst, it could happen to my mom." Who do you think this was? Y'all know her. Y'all know this little girl. Any guesses? Any guess? Back in the back? Any guess? Rosie O'Donnell. Now she makes sense, doesn't she? Yeah. And her dad wasn't being a horrible, mean dad. Her dad was doing what her dad knew how to do. Just if mom wasn't there, then I don't feel bad, and everybody will get back to living sooner. We had a call at Olivia's house not too long ago that just kind of shook me to the core. It was interesting. I don't have this happen very often, but this surprised me. Mom called, all panicked. She had a daughter, 16. Her father completed suicide when she was 2. The mom swore the whole family to secrecy. And she told her family, if anybody tells her, you'll deal with me. When her daughter grew up, she told her that her father had died in a car accident. When things got a little close and maybe people were going to let the secret out, she moved. So nobody could tell her what really happened. This child came home from school one day as mad as a hornet and was just unleashing on mom. Because unbeknownst to mom, the child, 16-year-old, got on Facebook. And a cousin's child, so a second cousin, let the cat out of the bag on Facebook. And that child learned through Facebook that her father had completed suicide and that she had been lied to. And it didn't matter to that child that her mother felt she was doing the right thing or that this was in her best interest. It felt like she had been lied to her whole life. So, of course, a child will be most comfortable with their parents sitting down and explaining death to them if, in fact, a parent is educated and secure and compassionate enough to do so. But oftentimes, that's not the case. And at Olivia's house, we have people call every day, and their words right off the bat are, "I should have called you a couple years ago, I know." And as soon as they say that, I know what I'm in for. I've got to pick up some pieces, and I've got to do what I do best, which is when you know better, you can do better. And I take the whip out of their hand and I say, look, here's the deal. This was what you thought was the best thing to do, but we're going to teach you a better way. And so when you know better, you can do better. I always congratulate the men that walk through the door because, quite frankly, that's the hardest thing in the world for them to do is pick up the phone to call me or walk through our door. And I am always excited when we have a group where 50% of the participants are men. Are you not too, Emilio? Isn't that the best thing? And that happens now more often than not. It's just awesome. One of the standard lines I get, especially from parents of teenagers, is, they didn't want to come, so I didn't make them. But there's always, they follow that up with, but now they're in trouble with school, and they're really hard to handle at home, and they're very verbally abusive to me, and I don't know what to do. So I think I need to bring them there. And I always say to parents, it's never going to be something a child wants to do, to come through the door of Olivia's house. But of all the children who have come through, and it's over 1,300 now, we've only ever had one boy not come back after week 1. That was a big 16-year-old football player who was so ashamed he didn't want the cute girls in his group to see him crying, and it was just too much, so he stopped coming after week 1. His sister kept coming and his mom kept coming. The mom didn't make him come because she didn't want to feel bad. In week 7, when families were getting ready to graduate, the mom said, is it okay if Zach comes to graduation? I said, sure it is. At graduation, Zach pulled me aside and he said, Miss Leslie, I need to apologize. I made a mistake. I shouldn't have stopped coming. I knew that right after I didn't come that second time. I just didn't know how to deal with my pain and my tears in front of the girls, but I should have kept coming. So I said, well, Zach, I'm going to always use you as an example, and that way you're going to be a teacher, and what you went through will not be lost. You will be my example, my shining star for why and how when a kid tells you they don't want to go, as a parent, you push through it. And you take the car keys, or you take away basketball, or whatever it is to get him in the door. Because we'll hook him. Our job is to hook him, and we do. Dina does a great job of that. We establish at Olivia's house a wonderful relationship through art, through music, through games, through being present to them, like Emilio said, just listening, letting us take them where they need to go. The next lesson they taught me is just because we fix a child's boo-boo doesn't mean we need to fix a child when they have someone that they love die. I learned this really, it's just an incredible message that I learned from a grown man who lost his mom when he was 10 and his dad when he was 10 and his mom when he was 12. And his 2 siblings were older. So they were given custody of him. And they lived in the family home, these 3 siblings. Joe, who at the time was, I guess, 12, 13 years old, his older sister, and his older brother. And Joe taught me a lot. He said, most people don't have the experience of what it's like to be a kid, to lose a parent or lose a sibling. They don't know what that feels like. So they think they have to hurry up and fix you. And adults think that they have to have all the answers and that they have to say it's going to be okay. But quite frankly, it takes a long, long time. And you're not fixed. You're supported. So now Joe, as an adult, comes to Olivia's house on alumni night. That's the night where all the families have the opportunity to come back and share their story and be wisdom givers, teachers of their pain. Joe comes because his best friend completed suicide last year. And he made a pledge to the wife of his best friend that that best friend's 3 small children will not be without a dad. He got 11 other fathers to circle up and make a pledge that there will be a dad at every event those 3 children need. There will be a dad to walk the girls down the aisle. There will be a dad at soccer practice. There will be a dad on graduation day. There will be a dad at prom. There will be a dad on the first date. These 12 dads made a pledge and signed it and gave it to the children. Because Joe knows it's not a quick fix. Joe knows it's not a boo-boo. Joe knows somebody's got to be in it for the long haul. And he is. I oftentimes hear parents say to me, and I can hear it on the end of the phone, and then they finally say it, "How soon can my kids get in your program?" Because they're miserable, and I'm really uncomfortable listening to them in pain. And I say to them, it's going to take as long as it takes. And we'll get them in a program. Grief is hard work at any age. Homesickness is the most prominent feeling a child has and they can relate to when it comes to grief and loss. How many of you have lost a loved one when you were a child and understand the homesickness feeling? Hands up. A few of you. How many of you as an adult lost somebody you love and can relate to the homesickness feeling? Okay. Homesickness is very interesting. And, you know, I was reminded by KC, my son, when I was writing this and we were talking about this presentation. He said, "Do you remember when I went to wrestling camp and I got homesick?" I said, "Oh boy, do I ever." You know, Casey was my homebody. He's always been the kid who didn't want to go sleep at somebody else's house. Everybody came to his house to sleep overnight. And he said to me, he says, "You made me go to wrestling camp." And I said, "Yes, I did, because I knew if you didn't go to wrestling camp, you'd never get off my knee." And so he went to wrestling camp, but he got so homesick. We got a call from his coach, and he said, "Casey's really homesick, and he wants to come home." So his father and I went to the camp, which was about an hour away, and we took him out to dinner. And we said, "Tell us about camp. Tell us about what you're learning." You know, and he cried, and then he told us about everything. And we took him back to the dorm where he was staying with all his buddies who were having the time of their lives. And he said, "I don't want to stay. I want to go home." We said, No, we need you to stay. It'll be fine. We'll be back tomorrow. Tomorrow. It's only, 10 hours. We'll be back. We made him stay. And he didn't want to, and he looked horrible at me when he went out, and I felt guilty. But he stayed. The next day we went back, and we didn't take him out to dinner. We just went and watched him practice. And the next day we went back, his dad only. I didn't go. And then the rest of the week he was fine. What we did was we allowed him to feel his sense of homesickness and the discomfort that brought, but we didn't take him out of the discomfort. We let him sit in it in a safe way. We let him experience it in a safe way. He knew he was loved. He knew somebody understood his feelings, but he had to feel it to heal it. He had to move through those feelings. And boy, was he proud of himself at the end of that week. We have a wonderful book that I have to recommend. We've given you one great resource, the I Miss You book. We have 2 other great resources for you tonight to take home. At Olivia's house, I have 10 copies of this resource. We use it every week. Dina and I are just so fond of it. It is a book that helps children to weather the storm of an illness or impending death. It's called A Tiny Boat at Sea. It's written by Izetta Smith. And in The Tiny Boat at Sea, I'm just going to share with you the last paragraph that Izetta writes. She says, "A family that weathers a storm together stays close in the warmth of the protective hull of the boat, even as the ocean rages. Once in the clearing, this family will always remember the warmly lit faces of the ones they loved as they huddled close together in the hull of the boat. Whatever the outcome, the memory of these faces remains strong. When a child has a parent that walks them through the door at Olivia's house, they feel loved. They feel strong. And we remind them of that all 8 weeks. You have a wonderful parent or guardian or grandparent who knows that you need to feel safe and who is there for you and who loves you. That's an important message we send. Another lesson that the kids have taught me is that technology connects and isolates a grieving child. How much time do I have, you guys? Am I running out of time? 5 minutes. Okay, I'll hurry up. As you well know, since the towers fell, a lot has happened. When I was a kid, change happens. When I was a kid, we would go to the beach. My parents had a station wagon, and my brother and sister and I sat in the back. I was the middle child, can you tell? And my sister always annoyed me, and my brother and I picked on her. I will admit it, we did. And my mother would say, oh, come up here with me, come up front with Mom. And she would take my sister and she would go to the front seat. This was in 1965. And my mother would actually, when she got tired, tell her, curl up down where my feet are and fall asleep. And she'd have a blanket and she'd sleep down where my mother's feet were in the car. Can you imagine what the police would, goodness. That's how it was done when I was a kid, you know? We didn't have all of these car seats and contraptions we have now. I have a grandson who, my goodness, to get him strapped in, it's like he's an astronaut, NASA. But that's the way things change. When Dina and I started Hearts Can Heal, I don't think we had cell phones then, we're so old. But honestly, these kids come in with every contraption, and when we set the norms, which is all the rules for the group that the kids kind of come up with for themselves, they're the ones that set the turn your technology devices off, which I have to have help turning my phone off. Casey does it for me. I don't even know how to do that. But it's important. It's important that we recognize that technology connects these kids. They're no longer innocent. They're no longer living in a world where just their community is all they know. You know, when I was a kid, I rode my bike everywhere, and that was what I knew. And I was safe, and I could do it all day long. I could leave in the morning and check in at noon and leave again and check in at night. That's not their world. They are connected to over 1 billion people, and they hear everything in an instant. And sometimes those kids are alone when that happens. And we have to wake up to the world they live in. And at Olivia's house, we pay attention to that. And we let them use those technology devices when sometimes that's how they find security, with an earbud in their ear as they come into their group with Dina. Pretty soon, once they feel safe, the earbud comes out and they join in. Okay? Facebook and internet are wonderful tools, but they're also dangerous. At Olivia's house, we've created the confessional, which is a recording studio for children so they can dump all that stuff that's toxic and they shouldn't carry around, but in a safe place where we can hit the delete button and it is gone. When they put that stuff on Facebook, when they tweet those kind of feelings, that's dangerous. It is there and it will follow them, and they don't have the brain cells to know that that can follow them forever. So we've answered that issue at Olivia's house with our confessional, and we're really, really proud of that. I'm going to skip to the last lesson since I've run out of time, Casey. And there we go. This says it in a nutshell, people. Grief is neither a problem to be solved nor a difficulty to overcome. It's a sacred sorrow worthy of expression. At Olivia's house, at the Solace Tree, at the countless grief centers and programs around the country that we are connected to, we recognize that it's a sacred sorrow. We are privileged to walk along. We companion them. We don't walk out in front of them and say, whenever you're done crying, catch up. We don't walk behind them. You know, I don't like your anger. I'll catch up when you're done. We walk right beside them, holding their hands, letting them know that we want to be taught about their grief. We want them to teach us about their feelings and the journey they're on. It's a privilege we go on with their sacred sorrow. Thank you so much for everything that you have brought to this mission. I hope in our community, if you haven't been to Olivia's house, you stop down and see it or give us a call, and we'll schedule a tour for you to come see this incredible facility.